Hello and welcome to this episode of Essex by the Sea. I'm Owen Ward, exploring the Essex coast, finding about the amazing and interesting stories it has to offer. Before meeting my guest, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and don't forget to tell your friends about Essex by the Sea and encourage them to subscribe too. The Thames Estuary is the UK's #1 growth opportunity. Those are the words of the Thames Estuary Growth Board, which is headed up by Kate Willard, OBE. And Kate is the Thames Estuary Envoy and joins me now on Essex by the Sea. Hello, Kate.
Hi there.
Thanks ever so much for joining me. So what does the role of an Estuary Envoy actually entail?
Before I go on to that, can I just backtrack one tiny bit, Owen, just to say I absolutely love the name of your podcast, and it's slap bang in the middle of some of the stuff I think we're going to talk about today. So Essex by the Sea, because we're all about the estuary and we're all about that great relationship between that beautiful river and the land. So we couldn't be, or I couldn't be, at a more perfect podcast. So thank you so much for asking me to join you.
Thank you.
So what does an envoy do? It's a very interesting question, isn't it? When I was appointed, which was back in December 2019, I was appointed as chair of the Thames Estuary Growth Board, which is the board which is really leading and spearheading and managing our growth plans for the estuary. And I was at the same time appointed Thames Estuary Envoy. And I remember at the time thinking, what happens to Betsy? Isn't that the same thing, that the envoy is just the chair? But no, and whosever idea it was, and I've never quite got to the bottom of whose idea it actually was, but it was whosever idea it was, it was a genius, because as chair of the growth board, I'm a chair, normal chair of chairing that board. But as the envoy, I am accountable to no political party, not to government, not to the board, not to anybody except the estuary and the people and the communities and the businesses of the estuary. So what that means in a nutshell, Owen, is that sometimes if we've got an issue on the estuary, if something's kind of got stuck or there's something that needs some help to move forward, I can move really quickly as the envoy. So it's a lovely, lovely role to have. You can probably tell from my voice how passionate I am about the estuary. And being the envoy just means that I can, if you like, kind of almost permanently be off-piste if I need to be, and certainly move quickly to capitalise on opportunities and to help things that might, for whatever reason, have got stuck. So in my book, it's pretty much the best job in the world.
I can imagine. Now, obviously, the Thames Estuary is quite vast in area. So what actual part of the world is it that you cover in your role as the envoy for the estuary?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question, because I think that our estuary has blurred edges. And I say that because lots of what we're looking at are quite clunky things, rail, roads, connectivity, big businesses, big sites that might need remediation. And our world is constructed, isn't it, by kind of political boundaries. You know, this is the local authority boundary, this is the ward boundary, this is the parish boundary. But you and I know that things like roads and plots of land are not confined by political boundaries. So I think the first thing to say is we have blurred or fuzzy edges. So we don't follow those kind of political lines, because they're just not helpful for business. And quite often they're not helpful for communities. But practically speaking, if you were standing in London with your back to St. Paul's and you were looking out towards the sea, we go from there out to Southend-on-Sea on the Essex side, and on the Kent side, out as far as Margate. So I kind of like to think of it as a sort of megaphone, which sort of spreads out from London, embracing both sides of the river. And really, really importantly, the river itself. So we work very closely with the Port of London Authority, recognising that we're the Thames Estuary Growth Board. We're not the bits of land that surround the Thames Growth Board. It is about the Thames Estuary. So what's key for me, and it's why I made that comment at the beginning about Essex by the Sea, what's key for me and for my board is that relationship between the land and the water. How do people get to enjoy the river frontage? How can we improve access to the river frontage? How can we improve access for businesses to the river frontage to make sure that more freight can move off our roads and move onto the rivers? How can we get more commuters using the river because it's safer and cleaner? How can we green the river? Because there's little point in lifting freight from a kind of dirty truck effectively onto a vessel that's not so clean on the river. So we're looking at hydrogen as an example of how we're looking at growth which is sustainable and green. So a broad geography, a geography with fuzzy edges, but a geography which is absolutely inextricably linked to that beautiful symbiotic relationship of the land and the water.
And I guess as part of your role, I mean, the diversity that you must have seen from sort of almost that inner city part, which is a little bit outside of our patch, inside the M25, all the way out, as you say, to Margate on the Kent coast. And actually, even just the opposite points on the coast, one side of the river, I'm guessing, would be perhaps quite different because, there isn't that connectivity. Certainly when you get further out into the estuary, I'm just thinking if you were trying to get from Southend to Margate, that's not an easy journey to do. So actually there must be quite a few differences that you've seen there.
Yeah, it's an incredibly diverse region, which obviously is part of its beauty. I know relatively well, South Essex and East London, but I'm spending a lot of time getting to know the Kent area, which was known less to me when on appointment. But there are some beautiful, beautiful small rural areas. I have a fascination on the other end of the spectrum with some of our big industrial sites. So I know we're going to talk in a while about the Freeport submission that's gone in, but the breathtaking beauty of DP World, of the port at Tilbury, and on a very personal note, I have a huge love of seaside towns. I know Southend-on-Sea very well. I love it. I visit it happily, not work-related to it, just because I love it. So that sort of that diversity, I think, is part of our strength. But you're right. What it means is that in terms of the growth agenda, there isn't a single solution. It's not just that, boom, if we do that, everything's going to be okay. Skills levels are going to improve. Education's improved. It's going to get better, because we're talking about a very different geography, different needs, different requirements. And so to a certain extent, some of our work, and the Freeport's a great example, which would have immediate and positive estuary-wide impact. But some of the stuff is more granular, and we're going to be having to think through more carefully how we can respond to some of the things that we need to look at to make sure it works estuary-wide, because that's our brief. Estuary-wide. So
I'm guessing, and I'm getting the feel from what you're saying then, part of your role is perhaps to help coordinate some of that thinking and ideas and projects that perhaps might have flourished anyway on their own, but actually putting that into a much bigger context and being able to sort of patch it together and link things up so that there's a sort of cohesion with all the projects across the area.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Owen. I think there's a couple of things there. One, I absolutely think it's our job to join things up, join up projects, join up organisations, join up individuals, join up initiatives, because we're about estuary-wide benefits. So that's absolutely one thing. I think the other thing is that there are some things that we need on the estuary which it would be impossible to do individually. So if we look at hydrogen for a moment, we know that's an important and emerging green fuel for the future. It would be absolutely ludicrous for, let's go back to Southend-on-Sea, for Southend-on-Sea to have a hydrogen strategy. It's too small to deliver the production, the supply, the transportation, the storage of hydrogen. We need, for something like that, to be working on a much bigger canvas. So the estuary gives us the opportunity to work on some of those really big ticket issues. Freeport's another good example. So freight to water, that modal shift, freight from roads onto the water, and things like hydrogen are also good examples of where we need, as people working on that growth agenda, to be working on a large canvas, not a small one. And I think the other thing which is very important for me is the kind of style of how we do stuff, and the way that we go about doing things. Through this technology, and obviously we can't see each other, we're just speaking, but I have my sleeves rolled up, as do my board and my executive colleagues. We are not a board that is perpetually talking or providing thought leadership. We are a board that is absolutely about getting our sleeves rolled up and getting stuff done. We're about to publish our action plan in the next couple of weeks. Once that's published, you will very clearly be able to see what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, but what we're going to do, what that looks like. And I and my board expect to be held to account for that. So if you like, I use that old analogy, and you're probably too young to remember this, Owen, but it's the Ronseal of growth. There was an advert, I don't know, in the 80s or something, and it was like, it does what it says on the tin. And that's what we are with the Thames Estuary Growth Board. It does what it says on the tin. We are going to grow in a great green way the Thames Estuary.
And there are a number of big projects that are already underway. We've already featured the redevelopment of Purfleet on Thames back in episode 9 of Essex by the Sea. DP World London Gateway Port continues to grow. There's new dock gates that are going in at the Tilbury Port as well during 2021. And also just recently, Highways England announced a contractor who will go on to build the Lower Thames crossing once approval's been given. So, there's already stuff going on, isn't there? So you're relatively new into this role, and there's already all this stuff happening, which must be a help and a boost to obviously further growth along the line.
It's a huge help. And obviously with projects like that, which are already successful and happening, those guys don't need us. So we're not going to kind of hang around and try and duplicate effort, Owen, because I think that's not helpful for those great projects or for us. Great stuff's happening. You just got the London resort announcement as well over the other side of the water from you. So some great projects happening. I think what we try and do is to add value where we can. And I know we're going to touch on Freeport in a moment. But yeah, you just mentioned the Lower Thames crossing there. We're just about to do a piece of work with the Lower Thames crossing. So that, that's a project of European, if not international significance, a tremendous feat of engineering. Will fundamentally change the way that we can move across the river or move onto the river. It's a hugely important project, but we're going to be working with them on a commission to make sure that local people, that local businesses are able to benefit from that rollout. It's one thing to say, well, we have a commitment to that, and I'm not suggesting Highways England, who are behind this that particular project, are being disingenuous, but to really help make local economic growth work requires an attention to detail. So we're going to be working with Highways England to make sure that happens, to make sure that our businesses around the estuary really benefit from that. So that was a great example for me, Owen, of a project which, as you rightly say, is already happening. It's already a great project, but we're going to add estuary-wide benefit to that project.
Well, an application has been submitted to the government to make the Thames Estuary a free port. We've touched upon it already, but what exactly is a free port?
So at its most simple, it's basically a zone where you have a different set of arrangements for taxation and customs, really to do, and these have been designed by government. I mean, this is not unique. Freeports occur all over the world, but designed by government. There's a competition effectively for them, and government have said they're going to award around 10, as you rightly say. Our submission's gone in today. So effectively, there's zones which have different taxation and customs arrangements to do those three things. One, really to stimulate business, to help those ports, those areas, and also the supply chains that feed into them to stimulate business growth. And two, to improve our ability to trade with our global partners and our new global partners. We know in this kind of post-transition economy, those worldwide relationships are super important for us. And I will just come back here and just talk about our bid in particular. In relation to that second one of Freeports being an important part of helping government build and rebuild and strengthen those international relationships, nowhere in the UK has the global reach that the Thames Estuary has. And that's a real strength for our bid. And the wrap around all of that is to help to deliver great green growth in the UK economy. And it might sound a bit of an odd contradiction there, a free port and green growth. But they are, free ports are, we have to take our minds away from some sort of old black and white picture of a load of, white guys pushing wheelbarrows full of big old boxes around ports and harbours. Ports are increasingly digitised. They are very, very digitally focused and run on the most latest and cutting edge technology. They are diverse businesses. They are businesses which are reliant upon new skills, not just those skills in technology and in engineering, but those skills, creative skills, people who are able to make those market links, to build those international partnerships, to sell, to buy. So one of the things that we're going to be doing looking alongside that bid is making sure, it's a little bit like coming back to Lower Thames Crossing, isn't it? Making sure that Freeport Award, as and when we are awarded it by government, we are able to make sure that young people and others, people who are looking for work, are able to access those really interesting and great and high quality jobs in the Freeport. So making sure there's the right skills paths, the right apprenticeships there, to get people into those great jobs. So it's a phenomenally interesting opportunity, and one which is absolutely right for the estuary, not just because of those international links and that international reach that we've already got, but, and I'm going to come back to a government agenda here, because the levelling up agenda applies to the Thames Estuary as much as it does to Teesside. You know, we have deprived communities in the estuary. You'll be aware of that, Owen. There are communities which are left behind, who are suffering all sorts of challenges, education, access to education, some healthcare issues, air quality, all sorts of things. So we're having a long conversation with government to make sure that government understands that a Freeport designation to the Thames Estuary isn't just about great green growth. It isn't just about innovation. It isn't just about the greening of freight. It is and those international trade links. It is also about levelling up the estuary and making sure some of those communities who are currently being left behind are able to flourish and grow in a brilliant way, and a way which is their right.
So with the application going into government, if you are successful in that bid proposal, do you see then that the Freeport status for the Thames Estuary then bringing jobs to the local community?
It absolutely will. It will bring around 25,000 jobs, and alongside that, investment, a skills program. I think what's going to be really interesting, and obviously we very much hope this will be the case, if we are awarded Freeport status, one of the things that we're going to look forward to doing as the Thames Estuary Growth Board is making sure that we're part of those discussions with government when the fine detail of that proposal is being worked out, to make sure that we drive out the best possible outcomes for our communities across the estuary from that Freeport. And a lot of that will be around jobs. It will be about clean air, and about innovation. So absolutely at the top of our list. And, you know, I'd like to, you know, as I said, this Freeport proposal it's part of a competition, a national competition. It is not a slam dunk that we will get the award on the Thames. We believe it would be a brilliant opportunity, as I've said clearly, not just for those businesses that are leading it, but for our communities across the estuary. So we'd absolutely love any of your listeners to go to our website, Thames Estuary Growth Board, thamesestuary.org.uk, and back the bid. I was speaking to somebody this morning, they said it sounds a bit like the Olympics, Kate, where you've got to kind of back the bid. Well, do you know what, Owen? It is a bit like the Olympics. And we want it on the estuary because it would be great news for us. So please go to the website, click back the bid, and get behind this brilliant opportunity.
Finally, Kate, if I may, what's your favourite part of the estuary?
Oh, that's a really cruel question, because I'm probably not allowed to say anything. I'm going to tell you, but you must promise not to tell anybody. I know that's kind of a strange thing to say. It's Canvey Island. Brilliant.
Well, not an answer I was expecting there, Kate, after you lamented so much about seaside towns. But yeah, Canvey Island, there you go. You've made it in Kate's book. Well, Kate Willard, thank you so much for joining me on Essex by the Sea and this episode of the podcast.
A joy to be with you, Owen. Thank you so much.
Essex by the Sea can also be found across social media as well. So get liking and following on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. So until next time, thanks for listening.